بدأنا بسم الله وبالصلاة الله على رسول الله وآله الأبرار.
Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome our guests, our brothers and sisters in Islam or non-Muslim. We believe that all brothers we descend from Adam and Eve, so we are all brothers and sisters. And as you know, we started our awareness week last week. And we have got some speakers. Brother Adam came today from London to give lecture about the purpose of life, which is we should aware of what's the purpose of life, what we are here for, and what we should do, and about the religion, about ourselves. Inshallah, tomorrow we will have converse tales, which about some brothers who weren't Muslim and became Muslim, and they will share their experience of being a Muslim with you. And hopefully you will come if you want to talk, you want to listen about this and what's their experience. And that's it. And welcome again.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Let me begin by thanking the Islamic Society here for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's my first time that I've spoken here. When I gave a talk at one of the universities, it was quite a long journey. It wasn't so long getting here, it was only half an hour. I was quite surprised actually. The brother actually got me here 2 hours before the lecture. I think he was nervous I wasn't going to turn up. But alhamdulillah, we had a good chat with Mohammed, who looked after me very well. This week's, or today's lecture, the purpose of life. Socrates is noted to have said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And what he means by that is to tackle and to engage in those fundamental questions of existence. One of the most fundamental questions in philosophy is to question why we are here. What is the purpose of our life? Why does something exist rather than not exist? Now, to illustrate why that is important, suppose now you are walking to your lectures at Reading University, your usual route, and you were knocked unconscious. And you awoke and you found yourself in some foreign piece of land, so in the middle of a desert, let's say. What would be the first question that you would ask yourself? Where am I? What am I doing here? Who brought me here? Right? Now, those questions are important to the one who is lost. But if we do not answer those questions in respect to our existence, we will be eternally lost. Now, I don't believe that we're cosmic orphans, but we do have meaning and purpose for our existence. And those questions of identity, who am I, what am I doing here, what's the point of it all, can be answered by a simple formula. But before I expand upon that, what if I don't believe in God? Can I have meaning and purpose in my life? Maybe there is no meaning and purpose. Can I just carry on living as if there were no concern? Can man live without God? Carl Sagan, a noted atheist astronomer, in his book Pale Blue Dot, concentrates on an image taken 4 billion miles away by the Voyager spacecraft. He writes this. He says, because of the reflection of sunlight, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light, as if there was some special significance to this small world. But it's just an accident of geometry and optics. Our imagined self-importance, the delusion of some prevailed position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in a great and developing cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all its vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. He also says, who are we? We find that we live in an insignificant planet of a 100 star lost in a galaxy tucked away in some forgotten corner of the universe, in which there are far more galaxies than people. Stephen Hawking has also described human beings as, or man, as an insignificant chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet. I'm sure he's not rude to everyone, but that's what he thinks what we are. Now, this insignificant chemical scum resides in a universe that is forever expanding. Cosmological data dictates that the universe will continue to expand. And as it continues to expand, it will move further and further apart. And it becomes further and further apart, it will become colder and colder and colder. There will be no light, there will be no heat, and there will be no life. So not only do each and every one of us here and everyone else pass out of existence when we die, but the entire human race is doomed to destruction. Now, in a horrific scenario such as this, how do we even conjure up some kind of meaning in our lives? What do we have to hold on to? What is there? Now, someone may say, well, hold on a minute. I am a medical student. I am a peace activist. I help the poor, the needy. I have significance in my life. But I just say this, if in the end it all ends the same, what does it matter what you influence? Whether it's the contributions to science, to research of the doctor to alleviate human pain and suffering, a mechanism to help students come to lectures on time, the efforts to secure peace in the world, the sacrifices for others, the conquering of lands, building magnificent illustrious buildings, writing a bestseller to establish your family, to accumulate a fortune, to strive for further progress and prosperity, the long hours of studies, our jobs, our friendships, all in the end amounts to nothing. We attach meaning to these things in hope that we will transcend death, but it makes no difference whatsoever. In the end, it all ends in this way. Why? Because if our lives are ultimately meaningless, then whatever you fill your life up with will be meaningless. But don't take my word for it. I'm a Muslim. I may be biased. What about the great atheist heroes? What did they see when they looked at the world? Well, this is what Voltaire saw. He says, I saw a worm crawling on the earth, and the bird going and destroying the worm and consuming it. Then he saw the eagle coming and destroying that bird. Then he saw a human being take his gun and shoot the eagle apart, and then the human being meets with his fellow human being on the battlefield, and killing one another, that worm enters the human being's body and devours it. He says the miseries of each are supposed to make up the good of all. Bertrand Russell, the late Bertrand Russell, a hero of atheism, a man dedicated his life, a life without God. He says this, that man is a product of causes which had no precision of the end they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his love, his beliefs are but the outcomes of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve the individual life beyond the grave, that all the labours of all the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole of temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of the universe in ruins. Now, Bertrand Russell wants us to embrace that reality, but I think that there's nothing there to embrace. This may be a depressing depiction of mankind, but unfortunately, my friends, brothers and sisters, it is an accurate and coherent one. Think of it like this. There are computer games where we can build virtual worlds, virtual lives. I think they're called Sims, right? Yes? I'm on the house passion. Now, we can have families, we can have friendships, we can create wealth, we can have jobs, promotions, we can become kings and queens in these games and conquer lands and build civilizations. But when you turn the power off, does any of that gameplay, those hours, those months, those years, does it amount to anything at all? No, it doesn't. Absolutely zero. In the same way, when human beings play the game of life 24/7, running around like mice, fulfilling our lives, and then it all ends when we die, have nothing to show for it. So what man is like a criminal sentenced to death, killing time before his sentence date. So unfortunately, my friends, brothers and sisters, it makes no difference whether you exist or do not exist. It makes no difference whether you live or die, because in the end, it all is meaningless. What about purpose? Does man have a purpose without God? No. How can that possibly be? Well, if God does not exist, then the universe is a cosmic accident. One big accident. But if the universe is an accident, a graveyard of matter, then what is the state of man? He resides in the universe. So he is nothing more than a freak of nature. He is the product of a blind process known as evolution. A cruel, lengthy process which not only coughs up amoebas, rats, but also human beings. So is there no reason for life? Is there no goal for human beings? Listen to Stephen Jay Gould, a paleontologist from Harvard University. He's a confessed anti-theist. Listen to what he says about your purpose and why you are here. He says, "We are here because one odd group of fish had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures." That's the only reason you are here. That's the only reason you're at Reading University now. Because comets struck the Earth and wiped out dinosaurs, thereby giving mammals a chance not otherwise available. So thank your lucky stars in a literal sense, because the Earth never froze entirely during an ice age, because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. And listen to what he says. He says, "We may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists." We may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. So man is nothing but the product of a little bit of stuff, atoms, chance, and possibility. That's all that you are. Qualitatively, you have as much purpose as a rat's life. In actual fact, bacteria have more of a purpose than you do. We just destroy the world. We just destroy the ecosystem, but actually bacteria have a better role in existence. Indeed, that is why the French existentialist philosopher Camus, he said, "There is but one true serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to the most important fundamental question in philosophy." Mohammed? Camus? That's right. He's our French brother. French is very, very good, mashallah. So when Camus was confronted with the mismatch of reality, the absurdity of life, when he saw what man needed, and he saw what the universe could offer, he saw there was a contradiction, there was a mismatch. So hence we have the absurdity of life. So the question is now, that if God does not exist and there is no meaning and purpose, how can we carry on? What can we do in its place? Can we just forget about it? You know, we always have those problems where we think, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'll just put it at the back of my mind," and then later on it comes and bites you on the bum. You think, "Oh God, I should have addressed it then." Can we do this with the meaning and purpose? Can we just carry on? Forget about it. Move on. That's a very interesting question. And the answer that psychology tells us, sociology tells us, that is not true. We cannot ignore that when we actually confronted with this reality, we cannot just ignore it. We must do something about it. There was an interesting article in Psychology Today around 20 years ago, and the topic was of this issue here. Can we just ignore it? Can we carry on? It was written by Martin Seligman, the professor from Pennsylvania University, and what he did was to analyze the baby boomer generation, you know, the swinging 60s, sex, love, and rock and roll, whatever it's called. And he analyzed that generation, and what he found is that in that single generation, there was an increase in the number of people suffering from depression by tenfold. Tenfold. In that single generation, there's this seismic shift in the number of people who are suffering from what's called clinical depression. Now, what he also did was not just to give us stats on the amount of people suffering, but he diagnosed them. And he asked the question, why? Why was this happening? And his answer was astonishing. He came to the realization that the reason that there was this seismic shift, this increase, was because those people had lost the art of relating their lives to something bigger than themselves. That their lives were somehow true or real, like the ancient cultures, that they had, their lives were playing part in something bigger than themselves, greater than themselves. And what Seligman says here is that when someone does not have something greater than themselves, then they become narcissistic. And he says that anybody who becomes narcissistic, who starts building meaning for themselves, by themselves, is going to become a very, very depressed person. So whether you believe that this answer can be answered, whether you believe that it has no answer, it's going to haunt you. The lack of meaning and purpose in our lives is utterly inescapable. So how do we cope? We cannot avoid it. We must deal with it. Now, is this problem a new problem, given the history of mankind? And yes, it's a relatively new problem. It's a blip in the history of mankind. Because up until the 15th century, it was inconceivable, culturally and intellectually, not to believe in God. It was an oddity. It was strange. It was even dangerous not to believe in God. But then came the Enlightenment, with the movements involving people like Hume and Kant and Voltaire. They allowed it for the first time to be possible to claim to be an atheist, intellectually and socially, culturally, to be an atheist. Now, by the way, the situation is completely the other way around. If you say you believe in God, people think you're odd, right? Even dangerous, right? Why do you believe in God? That sort of thing. But so up until the 15th century, when man looked at the world, God was in the background. God was assumed. When he wanted answers to the world, questions answered, God was always a part of that reality. So then what we have now is the Enlightenment movement resulted in a party gone mad, right? You know, when you're in a party, obviously it's a halal party, it would be segregated, no alcohol, right? But when you're having a party and you're enjoying it, but for some reason, I don't know why, but women seem to enjoy parties when it's just women, but men, we just get bored really quickly. I don't know. What we have now is the Enlightenment movement. During the Enlightenment movement, it was great. There was lots of enthusiasm, there was hope, there was joy. It was a brighter future, but what we have is a party gone mad, and we have the outcome, the end result, the mess that we're left with, which is no meaning, no purpose in our lives, in a secular age. So, the way in which, brothers and sisters, my friends, the way in which that we deal with no meaning and purpose in our lives, in a modern world, in a secular age, is by trying to suppress it. We suppress that problem of no meaning and purpose in our lives. But despite people's attempts to explain away our longings for something greater, the need for transcendence will not go away. If you're going to take something from this lecture, I would like it to be this. You can say more things, but I would like it to be this. That if you do not have God in your life, or you do not embrace God with your heart, wholeheartedly, something else will come in its place and become counterfeit God, whether you like it or not. It's inevitable. I promise you that. I promise you that. Now, when we think of idolatry, what conjures up in our minds is this primitive man bowing down to some statue, right? And we know from the West, the Greco-Roman culture had many idols in every city, and they had shrines around it which they would worship, revere. And also the Islamic, pre-Islamic Arabs, they had over 360 idols, right? They were quite fashionable. And every tribe would have their own idol that they would worship. In Makkah, for example, they would have a totem, and that would represent their tribal lineage. Umar bin Khattab, the companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, a very good companion, he speaks about two incidences pre-Islam, before he became Muslim. One, he says, that made him cry, one made him laugh. The one that I want to talk about is the one that made him laugh. And this was when he went on a journey. And what people did in those days is, before they would go on a journey, before they would embark on a journey, they would bless it with an idol. So Umar ibn Khattab was looking for an idol, and he couldn't find one at the time. right? So what he did was he found a date. So he decided to make the date his idol. So he put this around his neck, right? And he went on his journey. So he was having a great time, but then he started to get some rumbles from the stomach, and he started to become really, really hungry. You kind of know where this is going. So, and he couldn't find any food. So what he did was he effectively ate his date. He ate his God, right? Now for us that's quite humorous, that's a bit bizarre, right? And it was for him after he became Muslim, and he would laugh about it because it's ridiculous. But our societies are not fundamentally different from those ancient ones. Because what we do, we have our own idols in our society. We have our own priesthoods, our totems, our rituals. Each one has its own shrine, whether they are office towers, spas, gyms, studios, or stadiums, where we commit sacrifices in order to procure the blessings of a good life and ward off disaster. We do these, we behave in the same way in our culture. And one needs to ask, what is an idol at the end of the day? An idol is to ask something of X, whatever that may be, that only God can provide. Only God can provide. It is completely central to your life. Completely central. And if you do not have it, you have utter despair. Right? Utter despair. You're completely lost. Now, in a secular age where beauty, power, money and achievement have assumed mythic proportions in our individual lives and in our societies, what's happened is that they've been elevated to the level of idols. Idols in our lives. Not physical idols, but idols of ideas. So, now, we may not physically kneel to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, but how many women are driven to eating disorders and bulimia and anorexia to achieve the perfect look or the perfect body? What did I say? That an idol is something, without it, you'll completely despair. There's a study done by Grazia magazine. I don't read it, I'm just informed about it. And they asked a number of women, what would you prefer? To be fat or to be hit by a truck? Now, nearly 50% of the women said they would prefer to be hit by a truck. Now folks, what they're saying is that I'd rather die than to be fat. Now that is disastrous. That is shocking. That we have a society completely based upon how you look and what we do in our society, and we're all guilty of this, because it's conditioning with all the media and so forth, that we judge people's character by the way that they look, right? By the way that they look. For some reason we treat people that look better a lot better. Why is that? That's really bizarre. We even have things like beauty pageants. We give awards to people that had nothing to do with the way that they look. They were born that way. And that's equivalent to giving a trophy or a prize to someone who commits an accident. Right? It's ridiculous. There's no rationale behind it. Why would you give someone an award for growing an arm? You just have an arm, right? Qualitatively, there's no difference. It's very, very bizarre. So what we have is a culture that is completely gone upside down. Look, the ancient cultures, they used to worry about the status of their soul, about were they good people, were they kind to their neighbours, were they charitable, generous, merciful, like the way that we worry about the lines under our eyes and our foreheads and our waistlines, right? So what we have is a culture that has traditionally, in this country, in this society, that was about being good and doing good, is replaced by looking good and feeling good. So that's what we have in our society. Why? Because we have this new idol in our lives as the beauty, Aphrodite. We may not burn incense to Artemis, the goddess of fertility and wealth, but let me ask you a question. How many of us, in some shape or form, sacrifice our families, our communities, our marriages because of work, because we want to get that extra promotion, that extra salary increase, or that extra recognition of work, that we completely ignore our families, and what we commit is this kind of child sacrifice in our lives. I remember watching a program called Wife Swap. Look, I don't watch that much TV, by the way. I know I keep referring to TV shows, but It's a very good program, by the way. Yeah, I think you agree. It's a very, very good program, because what it does, it takes, if there's a problem in your life, it completely amplifies it, because you're out of your comfort zone, right? It's almost they provide a mirror to the person that's actually lacking. I really recommend you watch it. You know, the most tyrannical person on that show changes and starts crying. Right? Pharaoh, if he was alive, if he went on that show, he would, you know, really, really be sorry for his act. Probably, maybe not. So I was watching this program. It was they had a lady on there who was a career woman, and she would work tremendously long hours, and she had a daughter who was about 9 years old, and she said, she would have a nanny, full-time nanny, because she'd hardly see her daughter. And they said, you know, interviewed, and they asked her the question, you know, why are you doing this? Why don't you spend any time? She's saying, look, I'm doing this for my daughter's future. I'm working hard. I'm working these long hours. I know I'm missing out, but I'm doing it for my daughter's future. And then they asked the little girl, and the little girl actually started to cry. She said, I miss my mum. I'm always missing my mum. What the mother did not realise, in fear of not preparing for her future, she was missing out on the present. Her judgment became clouded with this fantasy of the future, but her daughter was completely losing her present, her relationship with her mother. And this is what happens in our society, is that so much pressure is built, so much emphasis on money and career, that what's valuable in our lives becomes completely negated and ignored. And for most people, what happens in our lives is that materialism is the new spirituality. Consumerism is the new spirituality. We no longer worship in the temple, in the synagogue, or the church, or the mosque, but we worship in shopping centres. Right? How many of us have gone there with retail therapy? I'm feeling down, I'm going to buy something, right? Armed with my talisman, the credit card, I go out there and, or is it called tawiz? My tawiz, the credit card, and I buy more stuff and I authenticate my existence. And what we've realized, well not so much we, but advertising agencies, they have realized that the reason people buy stuff is not for the thing itself, but the emotions attached to it, right? So when you're buying stuff, you're not buying the thing. You're actually buying what the marketing agencies, the branding agencies have arbitrarily attached to that thing. Anthony Robbins, one of the greatest motivational speakers, he said, the reason people buy products is not the product, but the state, as in the state, the emotional state. So they know how to do this. Now, how many of us have watched those perfume ads? And you're left thinking, what the hell was that ad got to do with the perfume, right? There's a guy on there, there's a woman on there, it's a fast life, they've got a flashy car, they're really happy, you know, all this stuff, razzmatazz, buy this. You know, really, oh dear, did I, okay. You know, buy this, you know, they know how to manipulate it. So buy this and you'll be great, buy this and you'll be loved, buy this and everyone will accept you, you'll be successful. They're constantly trying to manipulate us. Why? Because they know that we need that fulfillment in our lives, that we know that without God we have a vacuum, we have an emptiness, a void that needs to be fulfilled. So, and we know as human beings that kind of life, that kind of lifestyle of consumerism is not going to work. We know that. How many of us here have been in that situation where we longed for the next gadget or the next product? Right? My wife, she has a problem with handbags. She came up to me once and said, Adam, you know, I found this new handbag. And I looked at her and I said to her, but you have 3 already. And she just looked at me confused, like, what does that got to do with it? Right? You know, and I was confused. And she just, you know, anyway. But we all have our vices, you know. Mine was, you know, technology. You know, I do like technology. You know, I didn't buy the iPhone 3. I waited, I was patient, I bought number 4. Yes, and you know, I remember the day, it was like a newborn child when it arrived. You know, the door opened, the door bell rang, I opened the door, I got this nice, cute little white box, the cellophane, I ripped it open, I can still hear the cellophane coming on. You know, and then I opened this cute little white box, and as if the light radiated from this thing, you know, as I took it out, and there was an orchestra playing in the background, I had arrived, you know, I had arrived, I've got it now. And now, you know, I've got scratches on it. I don't care. You know, if I leave it here, you know, if I drop it in the toilet, it doesn't really matter. You know, it really doesn't matter. Why? Because once you've had one thing, you've had it all. We know that stuff is hyped. Stuff is always hyped. What we know as human beings, that things will not make us happy. It will not. It's not enough. Now, Oscar Wilde says something very interesting. He says, there are two things in life that are tragic. The first is not getting what you want, and the second is getting it. People know, we know deep down that stuff is not going to make us happy. It just masks the problem. And lo and behold, what does the creator of the heavens and the earth tell us in the Quran, the book of God? What does Allah, God, tell us in the Quran? He says, for the life of this world is nothing but an enjoyment of self-delusion. To think that this world will make you happy is just kidding yourself. You're fooling yourself. It won't. This world will never quench the thirst for transcendence. Only God can do that. What I'm saying here is not controversial. This is not a Muslim just sensationalizing the problem of man. No, this is something that sociologists and psychologists are recognizing. What they're referring to is the sheer pain of boredom in our lives. What is the boredom? The boredom of what this life offers, right? And what is ironic is that we have so much at our disposal. We have so much more than any other generation, so many kind of distractions, whatever it may be, Facebook or Twitter or whatever it will be, but it's still not enough. We're still not happy. We're still not content with our lives. And what we find is that people are trying to outdo the experience over and over again. You know, I watched this program called Man vs. Again, another program, never mind. Man vs. Food. And I was watching it with my wife, and we were thinking, and on this program, what they do is that, say for example, you have a burger, they create a burger this big, right? And there's this one guy who goes around, and every show he gets fatter and fatter and fatter, because he constantly is eating these challenges. So he will have a challenge to have a burger this big, right? Or a pizza. Literally, the pizzas are massive. They're really, really big. I mean, and he has a challenge to this. And we were asking the question, what's this fascination to do with this big version of this food? Because you can't eat it all. And again, it's to do with that outdoing oneself, outdoing the experience, outdoing the experience of food. And this is a trend in our culture now, to go for extremes. I'll give you an example. You've all heard of sadomasochism, right? Unfortunately, yeah, it's a reality in our lives. It's a bit weird. Some people like that sort of thing. The latest kick in BDSM is this, that you pay someone to actually kidnap you. Yes. You pay someone to kidnap you. You'll be walking down the road, a van pulls up, men come out in balaclavas, they grab you, put you in the back of this van, take you to some kind of dark location, some cellar somewhere, and what they do is they perform all the indignities specified in the contract. Yes, this is a reality, folks, I'm not making this up. Now, the most ingenious feature of this service is that you don't know when this is going to happen, right? You could be visiting your mother-in-law, or you could be at work, you could be in the shower. It all adds to the excitement, right? And at the end, they provide you a souvenir, DVD, so you can watch with your family. Right? This is a reality of what's happening. This is what people are going to, the extent that they're going for. Now, why is that? Why do we have this kind of trend in sort of in a secular age, in a modern context? Why is that? And we can speak about things like extreme sports like bungee jumping and all this stuff. Why do people go to those extents? I'll tell you why. Because people are so dead spiritually. They don't feel alive anymore. They want something to reawake that kind of sense of being, sense of humanness within them, because they're so dead. Now, what's interesting is that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said the difference between the one who remembers your Lord and does not remember their Lord is like the difference between the living and the dead. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? The difference between remembering God and not remembering God is like people that are dead. and the difference between the living and the dead. That is very insightful. This was said 1400 years ago. It's very interesting, this insightfulness that we're having. Now, what's deemed as a problem in our society now is what psychologists call existential angst. And what that is a subconscious fear that the world is somehow not suited to one's need. That there is an absence, there's a dread, deep dread of an absence in the world. So we know that this kind of materialism is not going to work. It's not enough. Stuff is overhyped. It's not enough to make human beings happy. Man needs a narrative. He needs a God. You know, even if he denies that God exists, he needs a narrative. He needs a story. He needs something to explain his existence. Man cannot just live on bread and water. He needs something more than that. Now we know that consumerism, materialism, we feel like is failing because when we look at bookstores, for example, we look at contemporary society, we have all these New Age religions popping up. You've heard about them: Scientology, Kabbalah. You can read, for example, on tarot cards, crystals. When we look at the world today, is that we see that paganism is back in people's lives. Now, don't you think that's ironic? Because what the atheists were saying about 40, 50 years ago is that religion will be extinct. That now religion would be extinct. But what's happened is that there is a revival in spirituality. Whether it's, or let's say authentic or traditional religions like Islam, Christianity, Judaism, people are actually attracted to these New Age religions, like, go on a retreat, find yourself, hug a tree, that sort of thing, yeah? And that is quite strange. Remember, religion should have been extinct. And what we have is also the response to atheism is almost like a wounded animal. That's why we have the arrival of militant atheism, because it's trying to desperately compensate for its failing. So what we have is people, even though they were told that there's no such thing as God, that religion was this juvenile part of delinquents of human beings, we still are attracted to spirituality. But folks, will that work? Will it work to invent meaning for ourselves, to invent this kind of religion? By the way, will that work? Is that going to make us happy? I don't think so, because to invent meaning for ourselves, if you believe there's no ultimate meaning and purpose, and to invent meaning for ourselves is to lie to yourself. It's actually to lie to yourself. It's to live a life of delusion. So what you're saying is, there is no meaning and purpose, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just lie to myself and that there is meaning and purpose, and I'm going to invent X. But for rational, intelligent human beings, we know that we can't live like that. We don't just want to refer to something that works, but we want something that is also true, not founded on falsehood. Now, Bertrand Russell, do you remember when I mentioned him at the beginning of the lecture? Yes? Do you remember Bertrand Russell? Yeah. I said it described him as a hero of atheism. Many people refer to his earlier writings, but they don't seem to refer to his later writings. Listen to what he wrote just before he died. He said, "I wrote with a passion and force because I really thought I had a gospel. Now I'm cynical about the gospel because it won't stand the test of life." This is a man who dedicated his entire life without God. Not just without God, but against God. And look what he says. On his deathbed, he says it doesn't stand the test of life. So whether it will be consumerism, materialism, or inventing religion or some kind of meaning in our life, it simply won't work. So what is the strategy? What is the remedy? Now, earlier I spoke that there is a simple formula to those questions: who am I? What am I doing here? What's the point of it all? Can be answered by a simple formula. And that formula, brothers and sisters, my friends, is I am Muslim. When we confess that I am Muslim, what that means is that you're not an accident, you're not a chemical scum, but in actual fact, every single one here is significant, and it does matter whether you exist or do not exist. Why? Because you are meant to exist. All of you here are part of God's plan. Everyone here is sacred. Why? Because we are linked to that sacred moment where God, Allah, bestowed upon Adam that sacredness. Every single one of us is linked there. Do we have purpose? Absolutely we have purpose. Allah, God in the Quran said that He created man as a Khalif, vicegerent, to represent Him on the earth. Our God, Allah, is a moral God. He is the locus of all that is good. He is compassionate, merciful, kind, generous, and just. And our lives are to live out those moral attributes in the way that you engage in your day-to-day life. So you do have a purpose. And the decisions that you make in this world have eternal significance. Life does not end at the grave. It does matter how you live your life. So what that formula does, it provides you meaning and purpose. But not only that, it is also true. It is also grounded in the mind. It is also rational. It is also intellectual. Why? Because what we have is that the source of that formula is the Quran. And it has stood the test of time. Bertrand Russell's gospel did not stand the test of time, but the Quran has. For 1400 years. Contemplate, ponder, challenge, falsification, evidence, reason, over and over again. The Quran teases and agitates the mind of the reader. And the challenge of the Quran still stands today, 1400 years. So brothers and sisters, my friends, what we have is meaning and purpose with Islam, and without God, there is no way we can have any meaning and purpose. So what I will do is I'll end by saying this, that you may disagree with what I've said, but one thing that you cannot disagree with is that you will be faced with something that's inevitable, and that is your deathbeds. You will one day be on your deathbeds, and you will have to contemplate about your life. You see, when we're in that situation, those things that were so certain to us, those things that were so established, those sayings and those principles, we will come and revisit them again. We will think about them again. Now, I end with this. Just make sure that you're confident when you face that reality. And think about the question of Islam. And think about your lives. Thank you very much.